I never expected that a broken elevator and a faulty fire door would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Sometimes the moments that feel like you're trapped are the ones that actually set you free. It's funny how that works, isn't it? For years, my life had been a carefully curated routine, a quiet loop of comfortable solitude. And then, in the span of a few hours locked in a concrete stairwell, everything I thought I knew about myself and about the assumptions we make about other people was turned completely upside down. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 28, working as a freelance graphic designer from the small one-bedroom apartment I'd called home for the past 5 years. My days were predictable, measured by the glow of my computer screen and the hum of the city outside my window. I liked my life, or at least, I had convinced myself I did. It was safe. I had my work, my books, my quiet evenings. But there was a low-grade hum of loneliness beneath it all, a feeling I usually managed to ignore by keeping busy. The building itself was a character in my story. It was an older mid-rise, the kind with thick walls that muffled your neighbors' lives into a vague, distant murmur. Its crown jewel of geriatric technology was the elevator. It was a wheezing, groaning metal box that shuddered its way between floors, often pausing for a dramatic moment of reflection before deciding to continue its journey. Most residents, myself included, had a complicated relationship with it, a mix of grudging reliance and constant, low-level anxiety. He moved in on a Saturday in early spring. I remember the day because the air was finally losing its winter chill, and I had my window open to catch the breeze. I watched from my fourth-floor perch as a slightly battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb. A man got out, and for a moment, I just stared. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt. His arms were corded with muscle, dusted with a fine layer of what looked like sawdust or drywall powder, and his dark hair was a mess of casual perfection. He moved with an easy, unhurried confidence, lifting heavy boxes from the truck bed as if they were empty. This, I learned over the next few weeks, was Caleb. He was a construction foreman, and he moved into the apartment at the end of the hall on the 5th floor, one level directly above me. My initial assessment was swift and, I assumed, accurate. He was rugged, traditionally masculine, and completely out of my league. In my mind, I placed him firmly in the unattainable straight guy category, a folder where I filed away most of the men who caught my eye. It was a defense mechanism, a way to admire from a distance without letting hope get its clumsy, painful hooks in me. So, Caleb became a part of my building's quiet ecosystem. I'd see him in the mornings, leaving with a steel-toed boot swagger and a travel mug of coffee. I'd see him in the evenings, returning with the day's grime still on his clothes, looking tired but content. We'd share the occasional elevator ride in near silence. He'd give me a small, friendly nod and a quiet, "Hey," and I'd return it with a nod of my own, my heart doing a little stutter step in my chest that I tried my best to ignore. He was just a neighbor, another face in the background of my life. That's all he was ever going to be. Let me take you back to the day it all changed. It started, as most disasters do, with a simple sign. Taped to the elevator's silver doors was a piece of paper with a message written in thick black marker. Out of order indefinitely. Please use stairs. The word indefinitely seemed particularly ominous, a promise of long, inconvenient treks to come. A collective groan echoed through the lobby as residents discovered the news. For me, on the 4th floor, it was an annoyance. For Mrs. Gable on the 9th, it was a catastrophe. For the next week, the stairwell became the building's reluctant social hub. It was a grim, concrete space that smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The lighting was dim, casting long, eerie shadows, and every footstep echoed off the walls. The fire doors were monstrously heavy, designed to slam shut with a resounding boom that made you jump if you weren't expecting it. We all learned to navigate this new vertical reality, passing each other on the landings with breathless greetings and shared grimaces of exertion. It was a Thursday night when the inciting incident, the real one, happened. I'd been working late, lost in a branding project until my stomach's growling finally broke my concentration. It was almost 9 o'clock, and my fridge was a barren wasteland. Resigned to a late-night takeout run, I grabbed my wallet and keys, locked my apartment, and headed for the stairwell. I pulled open the heavy door to the 4th floor landing, the hinges groaning in protest. I was careful not to let it close all the way, propping it with my foot as I dug in my pocket for my phone. Just as I did, I heard the door on the floor above me swing open. I glanced up and saw Caleb stepping onto the fifth-floor landing. He gave me that familiar, quick nod. "Hey," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "Hey," I replied, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. And then it happened. The fifth-floor door, released from his grip, swung shut with a deafening crash. The vibration of it, or perhaps just the sudden gust of air, was enough to dislodge my own door from its precarious position. It slammed shut with an equally loud, final-sounding click. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. We were alone in the stairwell. Caleb let out a small, humorless laugh. "Guess we scared each other." He walked down the short flight of stairs to the landing where I stood. For a moment, we just looked at each other, two people suspended in a concrete tube between our separate worlds. "Well," I said, trying for a casual tone, "I'm headed down." I turned to push the bar on my door, the one that should have let me back into the fourth-floor hallway. It didn't budge. I pushed again, harder this time, putting my shoulder into it. Nothing. The bar moved, but the latch didn't release. It was completely stuck. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, his voice closer now. "The door," I said, my voice tight. "It won't open." He came over and gave it a try, applying his considerable strength to the task. The metal bar groaned under the pressure, but the door remained stubbornly sealed. "You're right," he said, stepping back. "That's not right." He jogged back up to his landing and tried his door. The result was the same. A solid, unmoving thud. He came back down, a look of dawning realization on his face. "Okay," he said slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Let's think. These doors are supposed to open from the inside, right? Fire safety." "They are," I agreed. "Unless." I walked over to the door and squinted at the mechanism. That's when I saw it. Or rather, what I didn't see. The interior handle, the knob or lever that would normally accompany the push bar, was gone. There was just a flat metal plate with two empty screw holes. It looked like it had been recently removed. "They've been doing security upgrades," Caleb said, his voice flat as he noticed the same thing. I saw a memo. They must have removed the handles for replacement and didn't realize these doors lock automatically from the outside. I pulled out my phone. "No service," the screen announced cheerfully. Caleb checked his. "Same." He let out a long, slow breath and leaned his back against the cool concrete wall, sliding down into a sitting position on the top step of the next flight down. "Well," he said, looking up at me with a wry, tired smile. "This is a situation. We were trapped. Not in a life-threatening way, probably, but definitely in an incredibly awkward, inconvenient, and deeply unsettling way. The routine of my life hadn't just been disrupted. It had been brought to a dead halt on a dusty concrete landing, with the one person I was trying hardest to keep at a comfortable distance. The first hour was defined by a practical, almost comical, sense of futility. We took turns shouting. Our calls for help bounced off the concrete walls and came back to us, tinny and useless. The building was too solid, the stairwell too isolated. No one was coming. Eventually, we gave up, our throats sore, and resigned ourselves to the silence. That silence was, at first, profoundly awkward. What do you say to a near stranger when you're stuck with them in a concrete box? The air was thick with all the things we didn't know about each other. I sat down on the step opposite him, leaving a careful, deliberate space between us. The only sounds were our own breathing and the faint, distant hum of the city that filtered through the thick walls. "So," Caleb said, finally breaking the quiet. "Graphic designer, right? I think I heard you telling Mrs. Gable in the lobby once." I was surprised he remembered. "Yeah, that's me," I said. "And you're in construction?" He nodded. "Foreman. Mostly commercial builds. Long hours. Lots of yelling," he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Pays the bills." And just like that, a tiny crack appeared in the facade. It was a simple statement, but it held a weariness that I recognized. It was the weariness of doing something because you have to, not necessarily because you love to. It made him seem less like the confident, swaggering man I saw in the hallways, and more like, well, more like me. "I get that," I found myself saying. "Freelancing is kind of the same. The freedom is great, but the hustle is constant. You're always chasing the next project, you know. Yeah, I do, he said, his gaze fixed on the scuffed toes of his work boots. You ever just want to build something for yourself? Not for a client, not for a paycheck, just for you. The question caught me off guard. It was deeper, more introspective than I expected. All the time, I admitted. I have folders full of personal projects that I never seem to get to. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, worn, black notebook and a pencil. He opened it on his knee. To my astonishment, its pages were filled with intricate, beautifully detailed sketches. They weren't rough construction plans. They were architectural drawings, elegant and imaginative. There were designs for cantilevered houses clinging to cliff sides, cozy A-frame cabins nestled in forests, and sleek, modern city dwellings. They were artistic and full of personality. Wow, I breathed, genuinely impressed. Caleb, these are incredible. He flushed slightly, a dark red creeping up his neck. It's just a hobby, he mumbled, but he didn't close the book. I wanted to be an architect. Went to school for it for 2 years. But life happened. Family stuff. Had to drop out and get a job that paid right away. Ended up in construction. Here was the vulnerability. The hidden side. The man who spent his days in the dust and noise of a construction site dreamed of creating beautiful, quiet spaces. The perception I had built of him, the simple, one-dimensional character, began to crumble, replaced by someone far more complex and interesting. He wasn't just the hot construction guy. He was a frustrated artist, a man with a deferred dream. It was a revelation that closed the distance between us more effectively than any physical movement could have. As the hours crept by, the stairwell grew colder. The concrete seemed to leach the warmth from our bodies. I shivered, rubbing my arms. Without a word, Caleb stood up, took off the thick flannel shirt he was wearing over his t-shirt, and held it out to me. Here, he said. You look cold. Oh no, I couldn't, I protested, my politeness instinct kicking in. You'll be cold. I run hot, he said with a small grin. And I've got more insulation than you do. Just take it, Miles. The way he said my name, easy and familiar, sent a little jolt through me. I hesitated for a second, more before giving in. I took the shirt. It was heavy and smelled faintly of sawdust, soap, and him. It was an oddly intimate smell. As I slipped it on, the fabric was still warm from his body heat. It felt like a shield, a borrowed comfort that was both welcome and deeply unsettling. I sat back down, clutching the front of his shirt. We kept talking, the conversation flowing more easily now. We talked about movies we loved, terrible jobs we'd had, the strange characters in our building. At some point, lost in a story about a particularly disastrous family holiday, I laughed. It was a real, uninhibited laugh, and the sound of it surprised me. Caleb started laughing too, a deep, warm sound that filled the small space. In that moment, sharing that laugh, sitting in the echoing silence of our strange prison while wearing his shirt, something shifted. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative connection. We weren't just two neighbors trapped by circumstance anymore. We were just Caleb and Miles, sitting on a cold staircase, sharing a small, unexpected pocket of time together. It must have been after midnight. The initial adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving a profound exhaustion in its place. The conversation had dwindled into a comfortable silence, punctuated by the occasional sigh or shift in position. We had moved closer together on the steps, not for any romantic reason, but for the simple, practical sharing of warmth. The concrete was unforgivingly cold, and our combined body heat created a small, fragile pocket of comfort in the chilled air. I was leaning my head back against the wall, my eyes closed, wrapped in the comforting weight of Caleb's flannel shirt. He was sitting beside me, his shoulder just a few inches from my own. I could feel the heat radiating off him. In the quiet, every small sound was magnified. The soft scuff of his boot on the concrete, the whisper of fabric as he moved, the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a stark contrast to the stillness of the stairwell. "Are you asleep?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "No," I whispered, not opening my eyes. "Just saving energy." He let out a soft chuckle. "Good plan." A few more minutes of silence passed. I was acutely aware of him, of his proximity. I could smell the faint scent of his soap, a clean, simple fragrance that was now tangled up with the smell of his shirt that I was wearing. My mind was racing, a chaotic mix of fear and a dangerous, burgeoning hope. This was insane. I was trapped in a stairwell with a man I barely knew, wearing his clothes, and feeling a connection that was terrifying in its intensity. Was I imagining it? Was this just some weird form of Stockholm Syndrome, born of shared confinement and late-night exhaustion? "Miles," he said again, his voice softer this time, closer. I opened my eyes. He had turned to face me, his body angled towards mine on the narrow step. The dim, yellow light of the single safety bulb on the landing cast his face in sharp relief, carving shadows under his cheekbones and deepening the intensity of his eyes. He was looking at me in a way he never had before. The friendly, neighborly nods in the elevator were a million miles away from this look. This was focused, intentional. It was a look that held a question. My breath hitched in my throat. The entire world seemed to shrink down to the few feet of concrete between us. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I could feel the frantic energy radiating from my own body, the anxiety, the hope, the confusion. It felt like I was about to vibrate apart. He must have seen it in my face. He must have felt the nervous tremor that ran through me. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. He didn't touch me, just held it in the space between us. "Stop," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, a soft, gentle request. Just stop for a second. He was telling me to stop thinking, to stop analyzing, to stop the frantic spinning of my thoughts. He was asking me to just be here, in this moment, with him. And then he leaned in. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch like warm taffy. I saw the slight parting of his lips, the dark focus in his eyes. He closed the small distance between us, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was tentative, questioning. It was soft and breathtakingly gentle. It was just a simple pressure, a warm and firm presence against my own lips. It was a kiss meant to quiet the noise, both in the stairwell and in my head. He was kissing me quiet. For a heartbeat, I was frozen in shock. My brain simply couldn't process that this was happening. Caleb was kissing me. But then, instinct took over. The fear and anxiety dissolved, replaced by a wave of something warm and overwhelming. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his arm, and I kissed him back. The small, tentative pressure deepened into something more certain, a mutual acknowledgement that this was real. It lasted for only a few seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. It was a silent conversation, a confession made without words. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. His forehead rested against mine, and his eyes were still closed. We were both breathing heavily, our breath mingling in the cold air. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was charged, humming with the aftershock of what had just happened. And then, a sound. A metallic scrape from the floor below. A jangle of keys. A loud click as a lock turned. A beam of bright white light shot up the stairwell as the third-floor door swung open. "Hello," a voice called out. "Building maintenance. Anyone up here?" We sprang apart as if electrocuted. The spell was shattered. Reality came crashing back in with the force of a wrecking ball. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, smoothing down his t-shirt, while I scrambled up, clutching the front of his flannel shirt as if it were a life raft. "Yeah, we're here," Caleb called down, his voice raspy. "We're on the fourth-floor landing." A man in a blue jumpsuit with a large flashlight started up the stairs. "Heard some folks were having trouble with these new locks," he said, his voice echoing. "Guess they forgot to tell us they were starting the work tonight. Sorry about that." The rescue was swift and unceremonious. The maintenance worker used a special key to open my door, then Caleb's. The sudden flood of the brightly lit, familiar hallway felt jarring and alien. The world was back to normal, except it wasn't. Nothing was normal anymore. "Well," Caleb said, standing in the doorway of the fifth-floor stairwell, not quite looking at me. "Guess I'll see you around." "Yeah," I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. "See you." He gave a quick, jerky nod and disappeared into the fifth-floor hall. I practically fled into my own hallway, fumbling for my apartment key with trembling hands. I stumbled inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was still wearing his shirt. The days that followed were a special kind of torment. The building, which had once been my anonymous sanctuary, now felt like a minefield of potential encounters. Every time I had to leave my apartment, my stomach twisted into knots. Would I see him? What would I say? What would he say? The vast, echoing space of the stairwell had been replaced by the narrow, charged silence of the hallway. We did see each other. Twice. The first time was the next afternoon. I was heading out to finally get groceries, and as my door opened, his did too. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before we both looked away, as if we'd touched a hot stove. A mumbled "hey" was exchanged, and we walked in opposite directions down the hall, the sound of our footsteps deafening in the quiet. The second time, we were both waiting for a delivery in the lobby. We stood 10 feet apart, pretending to be intensely interested in our phones, the air between us crackling with unspoken words. The avoidance was a clear signal, wasn't it? It had to be. My mind, my relentless, overthinking mind, went into overdrive. I became the lead detective in the case of the stairwell kiss, and I was my only, deeply unreliable witness. I replayed the moment over and over again, dissecting every detail. The way he had looked at me, the softness in his voice when he said "stop," the gentle pressure of his lips. It had felt so real, so intentional. But then came the counter-arguments, the prosecution's case presented by my own anxiety. It was late. We were tired and stressed. It was a classic fog of war situation. A weird, one-time-only event fueled by confinement and exhaustion. He regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. Why else would he be avoiding me? He was probably straight, had a weird moment of confusion, and was now deeply embarrassed. He probably wished he'd never even seen me that night. This internal debate was exhausting. Hope would surge, replaying the tenderness of the kiss, only to be crushed by the fear of rejection, replaying the awkwardness of our hallway encounters. I would feel a flutter of excitement, remembering the vulnerability he'd shown me, the shared laughter, the quiet intimacy. Then, shame and embarrassment would wash over me. I had probably misread everything. I had taken a moment of kindness and twisted it into something it wasn't. I clutched his flannel shirt, which I had folded and placed on my dresser like a sacred relic. I couldn't bring myself to wash it, because that would mean washing away the last tangible evidence of the night. It still held his scent, that mix of sawdust and soap that could transport me right back to that concrete landing. Was I a creep for keeping it? Probably. But it was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that tethered me to the possibility that what I felt wasn't just a fantasy. My apartment, once a comfort, started to feel like a cage. I would sit at my desk, trying to work, but my eyes would drift to the door. I'd listen for footsteps in the hall, my heart leaping at every sound, only to sink when they passed by my apartment. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with waiting. I was suspended in a state of agonizing limbo, caught between a moment that had changed everything and a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. I was more trapped now than I had ever been in that stairwell. It was a Sunday evening, 3 full days after our rescue. I had officially given up hope. I was in the process of convincing myself to just forget the whole thing, to file it away as a strange anecdote I would never tell anyone. I would wash his shirt, leave it in a bag outside his door with a polite, impersonal note, and we would go back to being strangers who lived on different floors. It was the safe, sensible thing to do. It was the self-protective thing to do. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the shirt draped over a chair, when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock on my door. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. People didn't knock on my door. I didn't get visitors. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my ears. The knock came again, a little louder this time, more certain. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I walked to the door. I peered through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. It was Caleb. He was standing there in the hallway, looking just as nervous as I felt. He was wearing a plain black hoodie, and his hands were shoved deep into the pockets. He wasn't looking at my door, but at the floor, as if studying the pattern of the carpet. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. He was here to tell me to forget what happened. He was here to ask for his shirt back. He was here to make things even more awkward than they already were. Steeling myself for the worst, I unlocked and opened the door. He looked up, and his eyes met mine. The anxiety was plain on his face. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi." I managed to reply, my own voice thin. An awkward silence stretched between us for a few seconds. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He started, then cleared his throat. Can I come in for a minute? My brain screamed, no, this is a terrible idea. But my mouth said, yeah, of course. I stepped back and held the door open for him. He walked into my small living room, looking around as if he'd never seen a space like it before. He seemed to fill the room, his presence large and solid and overwhelmingly real. I closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing the finality of the stairwell doors. There was no going back now. He turned to face me, pulling his hands from his pockets. He was twisting a small object between his fingers. It was one of the elevator's old call buttons. Look, Miles, he began, his gaze dropping to the button in his hands. I'm sorry for being so weird the last few days. I didn't know what to say. It's okay, I said quickly. Me neither. No, it's not okay, he insisted, looking up at me, his eyes full of a desperate sincerity. Because I need to tell you something. And I'm probably going to sound like a crazy person, but I have to say it. He took a deep breath. The elevator breaking down, that wasn't a complete accident. I just stared at him, confused. What do you mean? He held up the button. A week ago, I was coming home from work, and you got in the elevator with me. You were carrying a big portfolio, and you dropped it, and all your papers went everywhere. I helped you pick them up. I remembered that. A brief, fleeting moment of shared humanity. Yeah. We didn't say much, he continued, his words coming faster now. But you smiled at me. And, I don't know, it was just a really nice smile. I'd been noticing you for months, in the lobby, at the mailboxes. I wanted to talk to you, but I'm a complete idiot when it comes to this stuff. I never knew what to say. He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. So I did something stupid. I knew the elevator was already on its last legs. The next day, I hit the emergency stop button between floors and then pried this call button out of the panel. It was enough to finally kill it for good. I was speechless. My mind was struggling to connect the dots. He broke the elevator? On purpose. I didn't think we'd get locked in the stairwell, he added quickly, seeing the shock on my face. God, no. That was a freak accident with the door handles. I thought if we all had to take the stairs, maybe I'd have a chance to actually have a conversation with you. Something more than just, hey, in the elevator. It was a stupid, desperate plan. He fell silent, looking at me, waiting for my reaction. The confession hung in the air between us. He hadn't just kissed me in a moment of confusion. He had been trying to get my attention for weeks. He had orchestrated the entire scenario, or at least the catalyst for it, just for the chance to talk to me. The sheer, terrifying vulnerability of that admission washed over me, erasing all my fear and doubt. So the kiss, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The kiss was the only part of the whole thing that wasn't stupid, he said, taking a step closer. It was the most real thing I've done in a long time. And then I panicked. I thought I'd scared you. I thought I'd crossed a line and ruined the one chance I created for myself. A slow smile spread across my face, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. You didn't scare me, I said, my voice gaining strength. I was scared you regretted it. Never, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He closed the remaining distance between us, and this time, there was no hesitation. He gently cupped my face with his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. I've been thinking about it every second since. And he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first one. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was sure. It was confident. It was a statement. It was filled with all the unspoken words, all the awkward hallway encounters, all the weeks of silent observation. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and hope and the promise of a beginning. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and kissed him back with everything I had. It was a mutual, joyful confirmation. We had found our way out of the silence. A few months later, my apartment looked different. It felt different. It was still my space, but it was no longer just mine. Caleb's worn black sketchbook had a permanent home on my coffee table, right next to my design magazines. His thick work jacket was often slung over the back of my desk chair. My fridge, once a sad monument to takeout and expired condiments, was now stocked with groceries for two. His apartment, in turn, had softened. A few of my prints were framed on his walls, and a plant I'd bought him was thriving on his windowsill. We had built a bridge between the 4th and 5th floors, a path worn between our doors. We fell into a rhythm that was easy and comfortable, a world away from the silent nods we used to share. We spent evenings cooking together, our movements a clumsy but happy dance in my small kitchen. We spent weekends exploring the city, or sometimes not exploring at all, content to just lie on the couch, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. He would tell me about his day, the frustrations, and the small victories on the construction site. And I would show him my designs, valuing his untrained but surprisingly insightful eye more than any client's. He started sketching again in earnest, filling his notebook with new ideas, inspired, he said, by the light in my apartment. The building itself had become a part of our story. The elevator was eventually fixed, its new mechanics operating with a smooth, quiet efficiency. But more often than not, if we were coming home together, we took the stairs. We'd walk hand in hand, our footsteps echoing in that familiar concrete space. Every time we passed the fourth-floor landing, we would pause. Sometimes he would lean in and kiss me, a soft callback to that first night. Other times, we would just smile, sharing a silent memory that belonged only to us. That sterile, forgotten space had been transformed into something sacred. It was our place. One evening, we were standing by my living room window, looking out at the city lights twinkling to life as dusk settled. Caleb came up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and pulling me back against his chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we stood there in comfortable silence for a long moment, just watching the world go by. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble against my back. "I was so scared that night, not of being stuck, but of what I was about to do. Of you." I leaned my head back against his shoulder. "I was scared too," I admitted. "I had you filed away in a neat little box in my head. The unattainable box. It was safer that way." He tightened his grip, his lips brushing against my temple. "I'm glad I broke out of the box," he whispered. "And the elevator." I laughed, a real happy sound. "Me too." I turned in his arms to face him, my hands coming to rest on his chest. In his eyes, I saw not just affection, but a deep, steady sense of home that I had never known I was missing. All my life, I had built walls to keep myself safe, curating a world of quiet routine to avoid the possibility of getting hurt. I thought that was freedom, but I was wrong. True freedom wasn't found in solitude. It was found in the courage to be vulnerable with someone else. It took a broken elevator and a locked door to show me that. It took being literally trapped for me to realize how emotionally confined I had been. Sometimes, life has to force you into a small, uncomfortable space with another person just so you can finally see the vast, open world you could have together. And sometimes, the thing you're most afraid of is just a door you haven't tried to open yet.